Hi, I'm Tilde. I help developers build with Google Cloud.
And I'm Andrew Baker. I'm from Temporal.
Andrew, what is Imaxxing?
So Tilde, 150,000 people bought tickets to see the Odyssey in 70mm IMAX when they first went on sale. I was not one of them. But people canceled their plans. People change what they're going to do on that weekend. And so I built this site called Imaxxing, which monitors every showing across the country and lets you know when a seat opens up. It was actually easier to get the seat map data than I thought it was going to be. And so the fun part was like figuring out which seats are good seats versus bad seats. Like I didn't want to end up in a seat in the front row, right? Like to me, I'd rather just watch the movie at home at that point. And then kind of building all of the other infrastructure around it in order to like not just watch my own local theater here in SF, but watch every theater in the country, watch it for like parties of multiple sizes, say like I need 2 tickets, you need 4 tickets, and build all the alerting infrastructure around it.
Rad, what is your stack like?
Big pieces in this one are Temporal and Google Cloud. So I'm using Temporal and I'm using a technique that we call entity workflows. But I should talk a little bit more about Temporal first. Temporal is an open source developer platform which makes your code crash proof. When incidents happen in prod, because there's just a massive amount of entropy that gets thrown at your apps every day between infrastructure challenges, network challenges, all the other ways in which the services you depend on can let you down. When you build those applications on top of Temporal instead, you get to benefit from what we call durable execution, which is at every key point in your code, which you define as a temporal workflow, and then some of our other primitives, you get to basically receive that durability guarantee at each key transition point so that if there's a failure anywhere along the way, you can still retain that executed at least once, and like in sometimes like at most once promise that you have to give your end users.
Oh wow, so you can like rewind history to the point where a failure happened and then, move forward from there.
Yeah, and I sure did that on this project, Tilde, a lot because as you can imagine, these like downstream data sources that I'm consuming to like look at the seat map data, right? They weren't necessarily built here in 2026 up to like all of our modern standards, right? They don't have like the same uptime guarantees that a lot of the other services that we as engineers kind of take for granted. Basically, building your code within Temporal gives you this resiliency so that when all of these other blips, which would normally like totally derail a user's experience, come across your code, it doesn't become a failure scenario and instead like gives you the opportunity to recover seamlessly. So I can show you even for this particular project. So this is what it looks like when it actually does spot some available seats, it'll send you an email that looks a lot like this and it'll say like, hey, 2 seats at the Metron open up. That was actually this morning as we're recording this. So I couldn't make it at 10 a.m. I had other places to be for the day job. Wish I could have been there. This is what the like Temporal dashboard looks like. So you can see I'm running like quite a few thousand active workflows right now, which usually you want to map to like a specific entity within your business logic. So for example, I have one workflow for every subscription. If you zoom in on one of those, you can see like, here's what it looks like for a brand new subscription. A user gave us their email address, they filled out the form on like the homepage of Imaxxing.com, picked their theaters, how many people they need in their party, all that good stuff. I send them the verification email, they confirm we're off to the races. Here's what it looks like when one of the theaters that the user is watching has like new, seats that became newly available. Is I have a different workflow, which is watching every showing of the movie across the country. When it spots those seats that open up, it sends what we call a signal into all the subscription workflows that are watching that theater and basically wakes them up. But you can do really interesting stuff with Temporal. For example, in this one, the way I've implemented it, I didn't want my users to have excessively noisy notifications, right? Say you're watching like 3 theaters in your metro area. I didn't want to send you like 3 notifications, like 3 separate emails within the span of like 2 minutes, right? So in this case, I'm using a signal from the theater monitoring workflow to then start a 1-minute timer, which says, hey, give yourself like 60 seconds before you send any alerts to the user to collect any other notifications that we might need to send.
Oh, wow.
During that 1 minute, like the process is sleeping, your like temporal workers are busy working on other stuff. You aren't like holding up any other work that's going on. When that minute expires, you can see here, then it wakes up, it says, okay, let's like actually author this notification, see what else we need to include in this digest of available seats. And then it sends it over email, and then I also have like an optional Telegram notification for folks who really can't wait to get the notification as soon as possible.
So from a user experience perspective and from like an infrastructure efficiency perspective, this is amazing. Did anything surprise you about building this?
It was just incredible to see how much people connected with it. Like I shared it online on Twitter and like LinkedIn and a couple other places, and it kind of started to take on a life of its own, which like, you know, a developer like me is exactly the dream with a service like this. Is I just want to like build a useful thing and share it with the world and hope that like other weirdos appreciate it as much as I do, right? And so, yeah, at this point, we can check in on my Grafana dashboard here, showing all the temporal and GCP stuff under the hood. I've got, actually looks like just this morning, cracked 8,000 total users who've subscribed to alerts through the service. Every day, I have a handful of people who like reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter and say like, oh my gosh, like I was able to get tickets because of your app. Like, thank you so much. That was awesome. But even this dashboard itself, right, is one of the surprises I had as I was working through this project because, you know, we've all, I think, started to experience how AI coding agents can accelerate the way that you build your software. This is one of the first projects where I think I saw how capable the current frontier models are at helping you deploy and operate your software. Like there were a ton of interesting points along the way where it was like, yeah, I felt like I could like just point, you know, my coding agent at Terraform and my GCP, like my G-Cloud CLI, and like magical things happened in a way where I was more used to having to like cobble together a lot of those infrastructure components myself.
Oh, wow. So I was going to ask you, why Google Cloud? What a perfect segue.
I've been like a huge fan of Cloud Run specifically for a few years now. Like I kind of got my start in the kind of developer work that we do, Tilde, back in 2015 when Docker was getting really hot for the first time. I was a really early adopter in that ecosystem. I did O'Reilly's first Docker video course, which of course got out of date like 2 months later.
How did you come up with like the theme for it? Because the clavicular, like, get frame mock. That was hilarious. I died laughing when I was looking at that.
Yeah. So on this one, I have to shout out a friend of mine who also does similar work like this at SourceGraph. His name is Graham McBain. I like coincidentally was catching up with him the day before I was going to launch this project. I showed him like an earlier version of the brand, which was, I would say, less provocative, like a little more vanilla. And he said like, dude, you should totally call this Imaxxing. Like, I was like, oh yeah, Graham, that's a really good idea. Then like after we got off the phone, he sent me the logo and I was like, Graham, if you want to submit a pull request, I will accept the pull request. So I got some outside help on the branding and I think it's been a big part of its success. Yeah.
Incredible. How much does this cost to run?
It costs maybe like a couple $100 a month is what I've been running so far. And I'd say part of that is just because there's a lot more work that's happening under the hood than like a typical project that I would launch like this would have. So for example, like I'm running a node pool of like, looks like 9-ish, right? Most of the time. And that's the one that's going out and like processing each fresh seed map, understanding how well it aligns to an individual user's preferences, kind of doing that hard matching work. There are enough showings all around the country that like even though it's not a really difficult calculation for each showing times each user, there's enough usage that it's added up.
So you built this with temporal serverless workers. How did that evolve?
There are a couple different ways that you can run your workers on temporal, and that's your worker is the thing that's actually like executing your workflows, right? The easiest straightforward way to do it is to just spin up like an always on process that's like drawing down your task queues in the same way other tools might be that you're familiar with. We have started like launching new ways that you can run your workers on top of temporal, including serverless native ways. And so we are just this month starting to roll it out on Cloud Run. I like got our engineering team to turn it on for my account before everybody else so that I can mess with it. And I'll say it's been holding up, right? You can see in the dashboard here, so far like work isn't dropping along the way, which I think speaks to like the level of quality that our engineering team holds themselves to before they even like begin to turn this on for alpha testers. Right, but the advantage of running your temporal workloads on top of Cloud Run in this serverless way is it basically makes your scale up and scale down tied to your temporal usage and not just tied to those secondary metrics like your Cloud Run CPU or something like that, which might be an imprecise way for you to know when it's actually appropriate to add more nodes to the pool.
Right, I can see how it doesn't necessarily scale with the CPU usage. What does it mean to run, because temporal workers are stateless, right? So how is that What does it mean to run a worker as serverless?
I'd say it's more about just saving you the trouble of having to plan and provision enough workers to make sure that you're going to be able to satisfy user demand when it spikes, if that makes sense. So for example, like these spikes that I've had over the past 6 hours where like I need to send out a new notification to half of my user base because of like a couple specific seats that opened up at the SF Theater. Using our like old worker methodology, those types of spiky workloads were difficult to plan for. And so we found that developers were often just like over provisioning their worker pools because they said, well, I'd rather spend more money versus like run the risk of a degraded user experience. Serverless workers on top of Temporal makes it a lot easier for you to basically crank up that compute in the exact moment when you need it based on the new work that's arriving into Temporal.
Oh, so like better auto scaling based on your actual workload. That makes a ton of sense. If someone wanted to learn more about your project and more about Temporal, how would they do that?
If you're still looking for your like 70mm Odyssey tickets, you should just go to Imaxxing.io. I'm told that they've extended like the show's run in theaters through like the first couple weeks of September. So still plenty of time to get your tickets. There's even like a little live view here you can go to and see tickets that are available in your area right now. And then for Temporal, just head on over to temporal.io. So we are fully open source, MIT licensed. Don't even have to like sign up if you want to get started in your dev environment. And then our cloud offering has a pretty generous free tier too.
So Imaxxing was built on Temporal and Google Cloud. If you want to learn more about Temporal, go to temporal.io. And for Cloud Run, go to cloud.google.com/run.